Hello, folks, and welcome once again to another edition of the Legislature Today radio show in a brand new week, third week of the 63rd Legislative Assembly. I'm Scott Hennon. Dale Wetzel, the managing editor of the Great Plains Examiner and Great Plains News, is here, and we have a busy night with lots of guests to introduce for you here on the program. Introduce our guests in just a moment. Also want to tell you that at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar, where we are coming to you live and direct, it's BAM night. BAM mugs are $1 off. BAM is an acronym for a large mug. I'll leave that to your imagination. I know Dale. I can see Dale's wheels turning right now.
Yeah, the first word is big and the last word is mug.
There you go. Exactly right.
The A is we'll leave to your imagination.
Anyway, they're $1 off those big mugs, and also.
And it is a big.
It is a big mug. Yes, exactly right. Which is one of the reasons it has that acronym, BAM. Anyway, also $1 off the burgers, and the burgers are really good too. So check those out at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar, the home for the Legislature Today radio show. This program on Monday nights brought to you by the Association of Oil and Gas Counties. They'll be joining us as well this evening, so lots to cover. First of all, let's talk about day one of week 3 of the legislative session. Dale, a little recap of what happened today.
Well, today we had a big blank measure. It's a $1 billion thing. It is a proposal to suspend the income tax, the North Dakota income tax, for 2 years. That would mean $1 billion less collected by the state treasury, and $1 billion more in the pockets of folks who pay North Dakota income tax. There's quite a lot of resistance to that, including resistance from the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, which thinks that it is not a balanced approach to cutting taxes. They're supporting an alternative bill that cuts income taxes by a bit and makes it a permanent tax cut rather than a temporary suspension of the income tax entirely. And also it has some benefits for property taxpayers, for people who pay business taxes, that sort of thing. The bill that was heard today just applies to individual income tax. It doesn't apply to corporate income tax or other types of taxation such as property tax. And one of the things that came up in the hearing was that are people really screaming about their income tax? Bob Stenjum, the former Republican majority leader, used to tell me that everyone complained to him about property tax, but the only one who complained to him about his income tax was his spouse. And so he used that as a barometer for public opinion and said, basically, we've got an income tax. It's not that much. People don't complain about it, and so therefore let's concentrate on what people do complain about. The sponsor of this income tax bill is Scott Lauser. He's a Republican from Minot, a state representative. He thinks of it as kind of a test drive of a way to try out what it's like to live without the state income tax without actually going whole hog and repealing it. There was also a separate tax bill that would give a tax credit to people who have suffered losses because of the flooding 2 years ago and help them, compensate them for their expenses in recovering. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention was the tanning bill. We were talking earlier about the thrill, if that's the word, of trying to repeal a section of law. Well, this would repeal the section of law that regulates tanning salons in North Dakota. And there are a number of regulations that affect tanning salons. Specifically, if you're younger than 14, you can't go into a tanning salon or to tan without a note from your doctor and without being accompanied by a parent or guardian. If you're younger than 18, you have to have your parents' or guardian's permission. You also have to receive a bunch of information about the effects of UV rays on your skin and that sort of thing. And also you can't tan. Once you go into the tanning salon, you can't go back there for 24 hours. And the sponsor of that bill, the bill to repeal tanning regulations, is Dan Ruby. He's a Republican from Minot. He essentially thinks that the law is unenforceable because how do you know if someone is going in to separate tanning salons 18 hours apart or 6 hours apart or whatever? And also we don't regulate people, standing around at the beach or, mowing the yard with their shirt off, and so why is it that we want to regulate tanning salons? Well, the Medical Association and the Health Department presented some rather interesting testimony about how UV rays, specifically those delivered by tanning beds, can increase one's risk of getting skin cancer. So we'll wait and see where that goes, but it didn't look too promising from where I sat when I was in the hearing today.
Interesting recap. Tax bills and tanning bills.
And tanning bill.
How about that? Yes. Well, let me introduce our guests, and we'll get going on the question of the topic at hand. 3 members of the Senate Judiciary Committee joining us tonight. Senator Carolyn Nelson of Fargo. She has been in the Senate since 1995. Previous to that was also in the House in 1987 and elected again in 1993. She's here along with Senator Stan Lyson, who's from Williston. He's a retired sheriff, a member of the Judiciary Committee, as I mentioned, also happens to chair the Natural Resources Committee. And Kelly Armstrong is here, who, in addition to being a member of the Judiciary Committee, is vice chairman of the Transportation Committee. So 3 senators to tackle an issue about some changes that others are saying we need in different parts of the state. Dale Wetzel, managing editor of the Great Plains News, here to ask our senators the questions.
Yeah, we should add as well that Mr. Armstrong is a defense lawyer in Dickinson, his attorney, and so he has firsthand experience with how difficult or easy it is to get a court date. And I wanted to start with you, Mr. Armstrong. What sort of ramifications do you see from the shortage of judges in western North Dakota?
Scheduling, primarily scheduling, trial scheduling. Judge Nelson testified in front of the judiciary today. A lot of clients, especially on the criminal side, are spending more time in jail than they need to spend in jail. Just the caseload, and I'll say primarily in the Northwest. I would say my judges in the Southwest District, and they're not really my judges. The judges in the Southwest District do a really good job, but our caseload is up exponentially since 2008, and we have 3 judges out there, and I think Williston's caseload is higher than ours with 2 judges.
When you say that people are spending too much time in jail, how does that happen?
You get arrested for any particular type of offense, and there's a bond situation, depending on your income level or not. There are certain conditions you have to meet until you get what's called pretrial release. And one of those conditions is bond. So if you can't afford to post your bond, you stay in jail until your case is heard. That is taking longer and longer all the time. Whether or not they're going to go to jail after the case is heard is a different story, but they are spending a lot of time in jail before a guilty verdict is ever adjudicated against them.
So in other words, these people are presumed innocent, and they're sitting in jail.
Yes.
Because they can't afford to get out.
Yes.
Until they're...
And there's other considerations too, but it's just the length of time between the start of a case and the end of a case is getting longer and longer all the time.
What we should clarify right away is what we're talking about here is a bill that was heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee this morning that essentially would authorize 3 new judgeships for North Dakota. 2 of them would be in northwestern North Dakota in the Northwest District, which is in the northwestern corner of North Dakota. It includes Williston and Minot. And a 3rd judge would be in the city of Fargo, where the Cass County Courthouse was recently renovated and expanded to accommodate another judge. Senator Nelson, you're from Fargo. Could you just try to tell us how this is important to the city of Fargo and the general region there?
I think it's important because when we consider the 42 judge limit that we had back in 1995 when we went through court unification, the population of the state was something like 630,000 people. It's now at 700,000. There's a need demographically. In the city of Fargo, West Fargo, in that area that we're talking about, population's gone up 45,000 people. We get some very high-profile cases, and you usually read about them on the front page of the forum. Those types of things take time. And the judges were saying that sometimes, Judge Fair came in today and talked about her first day on the job, and she had 78 cases. That's absurd. For us legislators, we come in and we spend almost a week just learning what the system is, how our computers work, and all those types of things. And to come in the very first day on the job and have 70-plus cases is just unreal. You also have in Fargo a large number of immigrants. The number of cases we have involving people from different cultures, the number of different foreign languages we have, the number of interpreters we need. These all take probably 2 to 3 times as long as a normal case would take. And so over the years, we have always needed that extra judge, but until the addition to the courthouse was built, we didn't have the space to have that judge. Now that we have the space to have the judge, the Chief Justice is saying, now is the time for Fargo to have that.
Would you feel comfortable, whatever your case might be, would you feel comfortable having your case in front of a judge that had 78 other cases that day?
No. I certainly wouldn't. I would want them to think that that's the most important case they're going to hear all day, which I know it probably isn't isn't the case. And in Fargo, we also have the advantage of having municipal court judges that take some of the Class B and lesser things off of our platter. But there are still a number of high-profile cases that we get and take a lot of time.
What sorts of things do you hear from your constituents who are attorneys or people in the court system about the ramifications of this to the ordinary person in your district or in your area?
Well, obviously, I hear from a number of people who are involved with juveniles, and Fargo does have a juvenile drug court. We heard today from one of the judges that he had to drop his drug court because he just didn't have the time in the day to handle that. If we can get to these kids in juvenile drug court, that may deter them from further damage, so to speak, and perhaps we will not see them at future dates in adult court or another time in juvenile court. And so I think it's very important for us to take a look at the long-term ramifications of these, not just what's going to happen today.
Senator Lyson, you were in law enforcement for a long time. You represent Williston, and that's where things are jumping. What is it that you hear from your constituents, specifically, folks in the legal community, about the real-world effects of having two judges to handle lots and lots and lots of cases?
Well, first we should understand that we've always had two judges, and then Watford City had a judge also, and so did Stanley. They moved both Watford City and the Stanley judges to Minot. So the judges in Williston, I know we heard something today that we heard 2 weeks ago when I met with the judges. Both of them had 162 cases waiting. Some of them go up to 6 months before they get to hear something. The other thing is we got people sitting in jail because they can't post bond. They don't have the money to post bond. They can't get into the court system, so they might be sitting in jail 60 days, 90 days before anything's happening. So the judgeships that are coming to the Northwest, I understand there's two. One will be stationed in Williston, and they're not sure about the other one.
I think we are back. Apologize, our link from the Peacock to the studios of K-Fire so we could get out to the listeners of the Legislature Today radio show. Not the best. Apologize for that. Dale, your question for Senator Lyson again so our listeners don't miss anything.
Senator, I was just asking you about the real-world ramifications of having too few judges in Williston. And you mentioned that there was a judge in Watford City, a judge in Stanley, can kind of team up and handle stuff, but now those judges are in Minot. You have two judges in Williston. You got a boatload more cases to deal with.
And the cases are just piling up and piling up. When we have people in jail that cannot get out on bond because they don't have the money, and they can't get to court because we don't have judges, there's something wrong with the system. So we've got to work on this to get things like this done. And that's really where the problem is, just too many people and too small of a group in the judgeships. The Watford City, for instance, used to have a judge full-time there, and now he's gone to Minot, and Judge Nelson and Judge Rusted have to go down there and fix it. The other thing we should say is when this system all changed, we were assured that we would not lose judgeships in our smaller counties. Now what we do is we're seeing a lot of people on television sitting in the jail in Watford City or Crosby or Stanley for bond hearings and such as that. We never used to see that. So we're in real trouble up there. I don't think people understand that the city of Williston has more than doubled in population in the last 3 years. So we know what some of the problems. It's hard to get somebody up there to go to work. Even a judge, there's no place to live. And every place is taken, and it's very difficult to get there. And so it's extremely important that we get another judge. I'd like to see two judges. I'd like to see one in Williston and one in Watford City. But that's going to be the one judge that we know that one's coming to Williston. We're not sure about the other one. It appears that he might be going to Minot. I'd like to see him go to Watford City.
What is the effect of this on law enforcement, the ability of folks to get search warrants, to have that sort of business taken care of?
those are one of the things that normally we do after hours or before hours, if you will. We get the works done and we go meet with the judge at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning. That's one of the other things that you should understand, that Judge Nelson told us today that he's in there at 7 o'clock in the morning and he works in the evenings. I've seen him, his lights on in his office 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. You know, you wonder sometimes when a judge is working that many hours, how does he get his work done properly? And I think they work very, very diligently to try to do that.
Do you think that the legislature as a whole recognizes the dilemma here?
I think they do. The ones I've talked to realize what we're going through up there. They're not really sure what we should do about it. Everything falls down to money. You're always looking for money. Well, money makes the world go around. And money is going to be the problem here, and that goes with judges, housing, and everything else.
Mr. Armstrong, what, to the extent that you've heard from fellow legislators about this, what is it that they've told you, and how do you try to explain the situation to them?
I agree with Senator Lyson. I think people recognize it. As somebody who is, and I don't practice up in that area as often anymore. There's a time change from Dickinson and just the issues of getting up there and spending time in that court system. I think they recognize it. It's really difficult to understand unless you practice in it or you are actually inundated by it. It is, we heard Judge Nelson say today, conveyor belt justice and triage. Those are never two words I want to hear about my court system, ever, as any citizen. And the reality of the situation is that's true. And I think it's important to note that's true with civil cases, that's true with family law cases. Criminal things tend to get more of the focus, and primarily I think it's because you are removing somebody's liberty. But family law cases and civil cases and everything just moves at such a snail's pace up there, and it's not because anybody wants it to move at that pace, it's just the reality of the situation. But I think there's definite recognition and understanding of the problem up there.
What about, Senator Nelson, what perspective do you have in terms of the realization that folks have about the problem?
Well, from what I've heard is there's not a problem with the idea of getting the judges, but there is a concern that with the judges comes help for them, and that staff also be included in the whole picture. You can't hire 3 judges and have no outside staff to help them. And so I think in this particular bill that we heard this morning, there is also a space for 3 staff people to go along. Quite frankly, in some cases they might need more than that. But when you consider 185,000 cases a year statewide and 20,000 that are reopened, you're at over 200,000 cases per year in the North Dakota court system. And that's not including those that go to municipal courts in the larger cities where, you know, they'll handle the minor parking fines and, you know, those types of things that are Class B misdemeanors or less. So I think it's imperative that we include the staff people for the judges when we pass the bill. Also, there was a concern, and I don't know if it'll happen, that perhaps we put an emergency clause on here because it is kind of a long process for judges to be named. And the Chief Justice was talking about new judges going in on January 1 of 2014. You know, if we could get them in on September 1st of 2013, it might help alleviate some of the problems. And so I think we may look at putting the emergency clause on.
Could you explain, please, what an emergency clause is?
Emergency clause means that once the governor has signed it and it's filed with Secretary of State, it goes into effect immediately.
So it doesn't usually, you don't have to wait until August 1st?
Otherwise, I think in this case we'd go to either August 1st, which is regular bills go in, and appropriation bills go in on July 1st, but it would still be midsummer before it went in.
Do you think it's going to be hard to find people to be a judge in the Northwest District?
Well,
Senator
that is one of the problems. And we talked about that a little bit today. If we're going to place a judge up there, is the state going to give them some type of help for housing allowance? Houses have gone, the price of houses are just out of this world up there. It's the evaluation of our homes have gone up, way up. So that is one. The other thing I forgot to tell you is that we used to have a drug court up there. We've had to, for teenagers. We've had to drop that because the judges were just too busy. And Judge Nelson used to do that, and it was really one of his pet things. He loved to do it. He's way too busy now. He don't have the time to even get to hear any of those.
We've been speaking tonight with Senator Stan Lyson of Williston, retired Williams County Sheriff. He's been in the legislature for quite a while. He's a former chairman of the Judiciary Committee and a current chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. We have Dickinson Senator Kelly Armstrong. He's a lawyer in Dickinson, and he is serving in his first session. He was just elected last November. And we have Senator Carolyn Nelson, who is from Fargo, represents Central Fargo, a Democrat, and she has been in the House. That was where I first met her in the 80s, and she's served most of her time in the Senate. And we thank all of you for being here. They are all members of the Judiciary Committee. That's why we've been talking to them about the court system and about this proposal to add judges.
Thank you all. Appreciate you joining us here tonight. We're going to take a break. We'll continue this topic with different guests. A couple of judges will join us in the next segment, along with Jack McDonald, a Bismarck attorney and chair of the North Dakota Bar Association committee that had studied problems in the judicial system brought about by the increased oil activities and challenges for the judicial system that's come there. So we'll tackle that when we come back as well on the program. We're live tonight from the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar. That's the home of the Legislature Today radio show. The BAM mugs are on special tonight, $1 off, along with burgers, $1 off when you join us at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar as well. Take a break, come back with more. This is the Legislature Today radio show on 550 K-Fire, AM 1100 and AM 1090. Don't go away.
The Legislature Today flagship radio station is the voice of the Northern Plains. 550 K-Fire. Live and direct from Bismarck, North Dakota. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar. The Legislature Today is also heard in Fargo on Talk Radio AM 1100 The Flag, and in Northwest North Dakota in the Bakken region on Talk Radio 1090 The Flag, Tioga Stanley. Now, back to the show.
And we continue with more of the Legislature Today radio show coming to you from the Peacock Alley Grill and Bar. If you are in Bismarck, Mandan, we always invite you to join us. We're here Monday through Thursday nights for the Legislature Today radio show. Saturday's program, you can listen on air, coming to you from the K-Fire studios from 10 until noon. Put that in your calendar so you join us week in and week out. A whole new round of guests. Similar topic, however, for this half hour. And Dale Wetzel, managing editor for the Great Plains Examiner newspaper, which is on newsstands now. Legislative edition coming up, by the way, next week. That's an all-new feature. And also the managing editor for Great Plains News. It is feeding news and information to broadcast into newspapers all across the state of North Dakota, is Dale Wetzel. Introduce our guest. Dale?
We have here tonight Gail Hagerty, who's a South Central District Judge. She's also the president of the North Dakota Bar Association. She is a former Burleigh County prosecutor. I'll mention her family situation. Her mother is probably one of the more famous people in North Dakota because of a restaurant review she wrote about the Olive Garden.
She was actually famous even before that.
Well, yes, she was, but I'm talking about nationally.
Stratosphere now.
I'm talking about internationally famous here, Scott. Because she wrote a very straightforward review of the Olive Garden restaurant, as is her wont, and it caught fire, and she was on CNN. She's just been famous as famous as Elvis almost. And her husband is a Supreme Court Justice, Dale Sandstrom. Then we have Jack McDonald, who is an attorney in Bismarck. He was the chairman of a State Bar Association task force that looked into the difficulties that the oil boom have presented to the judicial system in western North Dakota and across the state. He also represents media clients. That's how we came to know each other, is that when I worked for the Associated Press, he was my lawyer and the lawyer of a number of other media folks. Welcome, Judge Hagerty. Welcome, Jack. Yeah, right. Now we have some real music, eh? We all.
All right, we're back. We don't need the music any longer. Do you need to be serenaded?
I don't need to be serenaded.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at least it's not hip hop. Jack, could you talk about how this report came to be and what the conclusions were?
Well, basically, Dale, the Bar Association, of which Gail is president, became concerned early last year, actually, that with all the talk of the oil boom, and during the legislative committee hearings that I was attending, almost every interim committee hearing, there were some representatives there from Western North Dakota talking about infrastructure needs in Western North Dakota, whether it be roads or pipelines or like electrical lines, school buildings, gas companies, whatever it was. It was just infrastructure. But it came to be that nobody was really talking about the justice system. And as attorneys, the Bar Association was hearing growing tales and anecdotes about what was happening out there. Shortage of judges, you can't get court dates, you couldn't get trial dates. Clerks' offices were flooded, you couldn't file documents, you couldn't get your probates done. Judge Hagerty, as the presiding judge of the South Central District, said that they were experiencing some of that same thing here, is that they were experiencing an overflow from the oil patch because of those problems. So we said that what we needed to do was present some information to the legislature that would be more documented than just the stories we heard. And so we formed the State Bar Association of North Dakota. Judge Hagerty formed this task force of several attorneys and judges and citizens, legislators, and we held 4 hearings around the state, 4 hearings in Minot, Bismarck, Dickinson, and Williston, and took testimony from everybody and anybody who wanted to come. They were about 2 or 3 hour hearings. They were held in the courthouses there, and we took transcripts of those. We have written transcripts. From that, Judge Hagerty worked and prepared this report. And the report tried to put into evidence in a relatively short frame what we felt was needed out there. And one of the key elements that we recommended was the increase of at least 3 new judges out there to deal with some of the problems. And that's just the start.
And the Senate Judiciary Committee is looking at a bill to add 3 new judges to the system. 2 would be in the Northwest District, which is the northwestern corner of North Dakota, and 1 would be in Fargo. Judge Hagerty, what are the real world consequences for folks who are in the court system if there aren't enough judges and court personnel to handle the work?
Well, you've heard justice delayed is justice denied. We are having problems with scheduling. People aren't getting into the courtroom. We have some problems that kind of go along with that. We found that there was a terrible shortage of indigent defense attorneys. So we're having problems at a lot of different levels. But we need to have the clerical people. We are a system that operates through electronic documents, and we need to have people to put those documents into the files. We need to get them to the judges. We need to get cases scheduled. There are problems with jails being full on weekends because people can't make bond. Trials are delayed. Hearings are delayed. The problems seem to kind of snowball.
What is the importance of time to a judge in doing his or her job?
Well, of course, we can do a better, more thoughtful job if we have time to look at files before we go into the courtroom, if we have time to do more listening. Our job is really to listen. We need to stay relatively focused, but when you have to move a large number of cases through, you can't give each case the same attention.
And Judge Nelson? Is Judge Nelson on the phone?
He is, yep.
Judge Nelson? I don't hear him. I'm sorry.
I'm here.
Okay. Hello, Judge Nelson. This is Dale Wetzel. We spoke this morning. You testified at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing this morning about the situation in Williston and the fact that you're quite a bit shorthanded. Could you tell us, please? You mentioned at the hearing that one of the ways that you essentially deal with the fact that there's not enough of you, you have to stack criminal cases at a single day for a trial. Could you just explain how that affects how criminal cases are handled and just the implications of having an arrangement like that for dealing with criminal cases?
Sure. First off, I just want to make clear that every district in the state does things a little bit different, so I don't want somebody to say, well, this is exactly how they do it everywhere.
Certainly.
But what we do here in our district is, or in our area, is when a person, once they've made the decision to go ahead with a jury trial, they're given a date, and then we have what's called the drop-dead date. It's about 2 weeks before that date. Actually, it's 3 weeks now. We had to change it because the mail up in Williston is getting slower. But at this date, the lawyers and their clients all have to come up to the courthouse and either fish or cut bait. It's time to either get a plea agreement or go to trial. We call it the deadline because after that day, I don't accept plea agreements. I know there are some places in the state, and that sometimes in the past we have taken plea agreements at the last minute, but it's so expensive to call a jury in, and then that time is wasted. So what we do is if they don't have a plea agreement by that day, then we don't allow plea agreements after that. It's usually the very next day that we send out notices to the 40 or so citizens to come in to be our jury. Well, on that day, quite an often, most of the cases will settle. In the old days, if you only had one case and it settled, now you've got that day free. Nowadays, with the number that we have, the cases that don't settle, we then hopefully only have one, which will go to trial, but inevitably there's more than that, and then we have to figure out which one has to go, whether it's we try to give cases where there's a victim more precedence. We also try to give cases where someone's in jail, move them to the front of the class too, so we just go over different things. The lawyers make their arguments, and we choose one, and the rest get put back on a list for some time later.
Judge, could you explain how this situation that you have in Williston also affects civil cases, things like divorces and disputes between businesses or fights over mineral rights, that kind of thing? I imagine you have more of those with an increased population, and also you have less time to deal with each one.
Luckily, with divorces, there's been some new rules lately about parties having to try mandatory mediation, and luckily those things are working. Our domestic caseload hasn't increased other than what you would see for an increase in population. That hasn't gone up too much. But the probate and mineral cases have gone up considerably. They usually don't take up a lot of trial time, but they do take up a lot of reading time, because it's usually fairly well-paid lawyers with legal issues rather than tax issues, and so you get lots of motions, lots of briefs, and do a lot of research and studying for those types of cases. They're very time-consuming. There's a lot at stake. I personally have the class action lawsuit against the state of North Dakota, where they're about the mineral rights on the riparian rights over who owns the oil under the river. I can't talk much about the case other than that I haven't, because there's motions for summary judgment pending on both sides by very good lawyers, and there are a few thousand pages of documents to read.
Yes, Judge. I've tried to read as much as I can of the filings of that case, and it gives me the impression, and I am not a lawyer, but it gives me the impression that could keep a judge busy just by itself for quite a while.
I was one of my different hats that I wore prior to becoming a judge. After law school, I worked as a landman, or during my summers at law school, and then I worked for an oil company, so I understand these things fairly well, but I never really had a good handle on riparian rights, so the lawyers have done a really good job of educating me, and I enjoy reading it. It's been a learning experience. get a very good handle on the riparian rights law. But like I say, it takes time.
Yeah, Judge, I want to come back to you on this question, but I wanted to ask Judge Hagerty first. Could you just walk us through what it's like to be you? What is your job like when you come into the courthouse? Can you just talk us through what you have to do as a judge and how that takes time?
Well, we are generalists, very much generalists. We don't get to be specialists. So we're handling a huge variety of types of cases, and we have to often spend time educating ourselves, as Judge Nelson said, so that we're able to handle the cases. We have different assignments. We all have case flow plans, but in my area, we take a week where we're the master calendar judge, and that's kind of like being the emergency room doctor. You handle everything that walks in. Sometimes there are 70 or 80 cases scheduled for first appearances in a day. You handle the files, you keep things moving. Other days we're scheduled for trials. We have civil trial weeks, we have criminal trial weeks. We're stacking everything, probably all over the state. But we have to stack cases because otherwise we'd be scheduling in 2016 for a DUI trial. We have to stack. We know that a large number of cases are going to settle. We're in a situation now where we're having to start stacking divorce trials and civil trials and other trials just so that we can keep the cases moving along. We are scheduled, we are in our district overscheduled continually. When cases settle, then we have a chance to work on the files on our desk. I don't know how it works for Judge Nelson, but we get lists on our computer twice a day of the cases that need attention. So I might get a list of cases that would be collections cases or other cases where I need to read the file and sign a proposed order or not sign the proposed order and explain why not. We are working on researching and writing when we have motions in cases. I'm scheduled tomorrow. I'll be over in Mandan for a 4-day civil trial over a personal injury, a auto accident case. So I was writing jury instructions last week and meeting with attorneys and getting ready for that trial. I'm never bored because the things that I'm doing change a lot. There's something new every day. But the scheduling is a real problem. And we think we have kind of a compression issue in that when people aren't able to get things in front of the court in Williston, we think they're filed in our judicial district. We think that there is a problem getting family law attorneys out in the Williston area and that people are perhaps hiring attorneys in the Bismarck-Mandan area. So we're seeing that just the huge press of business there impacts us as well.
Yeah, Judge Nelson, earlier we were speaking to Senator Stan Lyson, who said he's known you since you were a small child. And
probably picked me up once or twice.
And he was saying that he notices that you get to the courthouse at 7 a.m., that your light is on in the evening. Could you tell us what it's like to do your job, and is it, just to put it this way, is it fun still?
It's always interesting. It's often fun, but it's always interesting. That's something that hasn't changed from the day I started. I don't think I'm working any harder than anybody else there in that courthouse. Our clerk's office are swamped. The state attorney's office, their lights are on when I get there and they're on when I leave. They're working even harder than I am, I can assure you. So it's not just me. I can assure you of that. I will concur with Judge Hagerty, though. A lot of our family law is moving down to that area. In days past, we used to get a motion called a change of venue motion, where one lawyer would be arguing as to why we should move the case somewhere else. And lately, I've been getting stipulations by both lawyers that say, we both agree this case should be moved to Bismarck. Why? Because we can get on their calendar and we can't get on yours. So I know their calendar is going to be filling up with our domestics.
Judge Nelson, you mentioned at the hearing this morning that you aren't able to do juvenile drug court anymore, and because of the time that takes, and that you liked doing it. Could you explain what juvenile drug court is and why you thought it was important? Why you thought it was an important part of your job?
Well, actually, you got the state's expert on juvenile drug court there. I don't know whether she's on the phone or there in person, but Judge Hagerty, I think hers was the first and is certainly the epitome of what the juvenile drug courts are. So she can give you a lot more than I, but I can tell you from my personal point of view, I hardly ever get to know the kids in a regular case. I walk in and I walk out. I mean, I see them in the courtroom. Whereas with juvenile drug court, I get to know their names. When they graduate, they're friends. One of our graduates, I remember meeting in the grocery store with my wife and introduced them, and I never would have done that in the average case because I don't know them. I'm not a part of their life. It's a very rewarding thing from a judge's point of view, but as far as what they are, I wouldn't dream to say that I know anything more than Judge Hagerty does on that issue.
Well,
ours failed after a while. We just didn't have the time to put into it, and we just decided to put it on hold for a while.
As I understand how the juvenile drug court works, Judge Hagerty, you're almost like a super probation officer. You're supervising these kids in their progress, and could you just explain how it works and how you think it's beneficial?
Well, I think especially with the juvenile drug court, it involves a lot of supervision by a probation officer. It involves monitored work in a treatment program. It involves getting information from all of the other resources that are available to the young person, and then the regular court appearances. So I'm sure that Judge Nelson, like me, we only see people when they're in trouble again in the regular courtroom. When we're working with a drug court, we get to share some of the successes. If somebody gets a job, or if somebody has their first savings account, or if somebody gets an A in a class, or there are wonderful successes that we get to share that you don't see with our regular caseload.
Jack, we're speaking tonight with Judge David Nelson from Williston, Judge Gail Hagerty from Bismarck. She is also the president of the Bar Association, and Bismarck attorney Jack McDonald, who was the chairperson of a committee that looked into the strains that the oil development has been putting on the judicial system in North Dakota. Jack, how well do you think the report has been received in terms of being able to actually drive policy and make something happen?
Excuse me, Dale. I think it's been well received. I think it provided the basis for a lot of recommendations, and I think you see that right now with the legislation that's going forward.
And what do you see?
Well, we're seeing recommendations for new clerks of court, more clerks of court, more staff personnel in the court's offices. We're seeing recommendations for increased law enforcement officers at both the city and the county level. Of course, we're seeing the recommendations for the new judges and the court reporters as well. And down the line, you're seeing the Human Services Department, the social workers up there are terribly overstressed. Probation officers, there's moved for more. We recommended those as well. So I think right down the line, a lot of our recommendations have been accepted, and the basis for some of those bills have been what we recommended.
And could you just encapsulate for me, why should the public care about issues like this?
Well, because the justice system is a part of the fabric of life, and if you can't process not only the criminal cases that Judge Nelson was talking about, but the civil disputes, your domestic relations, your business disputes over mineral rights, your drug cases, those types of things, life won't go on. You can't have a rolling economy if you can't have a system that keeps that economy going.
One of the things I wanted to ask about, it doesn't have anything to do with the number of judges. There was a proposal in the Chief Justice's State of the Judiciary speech about rural law clerkships for students at the University of North Dakota Law School. I believe 3 clerkships is what is proposed. to essentially try to interest law students in working in rural communities. We have a minute left. How would that work? I mean, I guess let's get to this. Is there a shortage of lawyers in rural North Dakota, and what can be done about it?
There is a shortage of lawyers in rural North Dakota, and those lawyers that are in the rural areas are aging. What we'd like to do is have an opportunity for law students to come out, work with a judge in a rural county for 8 weeks or 10 weeks during a summer, and then perhaps continue to do research. We'd like to introduce them to the rural areas and look at the opportunity and the wonderful lifestyle that might be available to them.
What do you think, Jack? Do you think that would appeal to you as a young law student?
Well, I think it would. It certainly would. There's a real shortage of, as Judge Hagerty said, there's some of those counties in the western part of the state, particularly, where there's just one attorney, 2 attorneys, 0 attorneys. And as a young person, you're looking to develop a career, that would be a great place to start.
We're talking this evening with Judge David Nelson from Williston. He's on the phone with us. Thank you, Judge Nelson. We're speaking to Bismarck Attorney Jack McDonald and South Central District Judge Gail Hagerty, who is the president of the North Dakota Bar Association. Thank all of you, please. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank our guests for joining us on an important topic that we'll continue to follow for you, and hope that gives you a sense of the needs and the demands on the judicial system from a pleasant problem we have in North Dakota that is a growing state, a booming state, and one of the challenges that comes with it there. All right, we need to take a break. Thank you very much. Another hour in the books of the Legislature Today radio show on 550 KFire, AM 1100 The Flag, and AM 1090 Talk Radio on the Bakken.